Today's video is sponsored by War Thunder. War Thunder is a realistic, free-to-play military vehicle combat game. Is available on PC, PS5, Xbox Series X, and previous console generations as well. So lots of options for all types of gamers. And no need to purchase, just download and play. Sometimes free really does mean free. In War Thunder, there are more than 2,000 historically accurate vehicles, all the way from the 1920s to the present day. They're all carefully built and incredibly detailed with hyper-realistic physics engines. Even the sound is going to blow you away with its realism. Obviously, with a game featuring this many different types of vehicles and armor, one of the most fun things to do is just jump into a PvP game set on one of the hundreds of battlefields from throughout the last 100 years of warfare. You can play realistic mode, which is challenging, or if you're super hardcore, you could play simulator difficulty. Not that I know anything about that. I don't play simulator because I don't like having my arse handed to me again and again and again. You guys can join us on the battlefield today by going to wtplay.link/side projects WT, or by clicking the link below because that is a complicated link. Doing that supports the show. You also get a free premium tank ship or aircraft and 3 days of premium time as a bonus for registering, which is great thanks to War Thunder. And now today's video. Imagine for a moment that World War III finally erupts. The draft is issued and governments the world over scramble to conscript their citizens in preparation for the ultimate battle of East versus West. You're anxious about facing the enemy, but take comfort in knowing that you, a soldier of the free and democratic world, holds the technological scale tipped firmly in your favor, giving you a definitive edge against your opponents. So, how would you react upon discovering that among your super modern high-tech arsenal, you may be sent into combat fielding World War I era weaponry? You'd probably be thinking something along the lines of, what the guys, where is my robot? While you may be conjuring images of bulky bolt-action rifles and horse-drawn artillery pieces, there are but a couple of notable exceptions that would seem at home amid the carnage of the modern battlefield, and there are none more notable than that of the 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun, or the Medusa as it's colloquially dubbed, the longest produced machine gun the world's arms market has ever seen. This behemoth of a machine gun has faithfully and dependably served several generations of soldiers since the outbreak of the Second World War, and has since appeared in every major armed conflict around the world in a variety of models and configurations. From the dense urban cities of Western Europe to the humid jungles of Vietnam and the frozen steppes of the 38th parallel and the arid, dustrian sandscapes of 21st century Afghanistan, and everything in between, the Browning 50 cal has cemented itself as the poster child of 20th century warfare. Having been adopted as the primary heavy machine gun of all NATO member countries and various other worldwide nations, the M2 is about as unavoidable in the modern theater of war as American intervention in a politically turbulent, oil-rich country. This Swiss Army knife of the machine gun world is utilized in a smorgasbord of different offensive and defensive roles, including but not limited to anti-aircraft, anti-armor, anti-personnel, and generally, well, anti-anything you decide to aim it at and pull the trigger. In today's episode of Mega Projects, we're going to be taking a look at why the Browning M2 has stood the test of time and examine what makes this heavy machine gun the quintessential armament of the 21st century. As World War I unfolded, weapons of larger-than-rifle caliber were steadily introduced to both sides of the conflict. The larger rounds were a much-needed answer to the increasingly durable armor seen both in the sky and on the ground. In August 1917, Imperial Germany deployed an all-new cutting-edge armored aircraft to serve in low-level ground attack and reconnaissance roles on the Western Front. The Junkers JI, or Steel Bathtub as it's affectionately known, was an armored J-class Sesqui plane that featured a single unit of steel armor plating that ran from behind the propeller to the rear crew position, encasing its crew, engine, fuel tanks, and radio equipment in a formidable 5mm, that's 0.2 inches of protective steel armor plating, weighing in at a hefty 470 kilograms, or about 1,000 pounds. This thicker armor plating rendered attempts to shoot down the aircraft with conventional rifles as just ineffective. At the time, US Colonel John Henry Parker was commanding a machine gun school in France and observed the effectiveness of a French 11mm armor-piercing incendiary round, believing that a similarly capable cartridge would be instrumental to the American war effort. The increasing demand for firepower was overwhelming, and in April 1918, General John Joseph Pershing, or Blackjack Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Force, contacted the United States Army Ordnance Department and formally requested a larger caliber machine gun that fired a projectile of 0.5 inches with a muzzle velocity in excess of 2,700 feet per second. This substantial increase in firepower was originally intended to serve in both an anti-aircraft and anti-armor role. There was just one problem: neither a cartridge of this size nor the gun to fire it had yet been invented. The United States Army Ordnance Department contacted the renowned gunsmith and engineer John Moses Browning, who immediately set about designing the new armaments. Luckily for Browning, the Germans had already begun experimenting with unusually large caliber ammunition for use in anti-tank warfare. The Mauser Tankgewehr M1918, or TUF, short for Tank und Flieger, or Tank and Aircraft, was an absolute beast of a rifle. Chambering the newly developed 13.2 by 93mm SR cartridge, it was essentially a scaled-up version of the Mauser Gewehr 98, the standard German infantry rifle of the era, and it packed a hell of a punch. The tank killer was a single-shot weapon that had to be manually reloaded after each shot. It differed from other rifles of the era in that it featured a pistol grip, a bipod, and a barrel almost 1 meter in length. The new cartridge also featured a muzzle velocity of 2,700 feet a second and an 800-gram projectile that could penetrate 1 inch of steel armor at a range of 230 meters. That's about 250 yards. Such a rifle was developed after the British had launched a large-scale tank offensive at Cambrai in the fall of November 1917, the largest deployment of armor during the war that saw 476 of the new British Mark I tanks push German forces back some 20 kilometers or 12 miles. A number of these rifles were captured by advancing Allied forces and were shipped to America, where they could be properly analyzed and assist in the development of Browning's latest assignment. Already credited for such iconic small arms designs as the M1911 semi-automatic pistol, the Browning automatic rifle, BAR, and the M1917 water-cooled machine gun, Browning set about scaling up the M1917 for a heavier cartridge of his own design. Working alongside the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, Colt, and later Frankfurt Arsenal, Browning scaled up the .3006 rounds to 50 caliber rounds, that's 12.7 millimeters, and adopted it for the resulting new machine gun, the water-cooled M1921. The M1921 weighed 35 kilograms, 79 pounds, without water, and boasted a firing rate of 500 rounds a minute. Unluckily for Browning, or perhaps luckily for your average German infantryman, the prototypes were ironically ready for testing just in time for the war to end on the 11th of November 1918. While the US Army saw obvious potential in the joint Colt-Browning design, the enormous power of the 50 BMG, or 50 Browning machine gun cartridge, proved far too excessive for their initial model and forced both companies to go back to the drawing board. During the interwar years, Springfield Armory aided Colt in further development of the M1921 by contributing swaths of resources and engineers. Among those dispatched to Colt was Springfield engineer Dr. Samuel Green, who built upon the established design and made some significant improvements. The addition of a cammed charging handle allowed for easier charging of the weapon, alteration of the belt holding pawls facilitated the ambidextrous feeding of ammunition, a universal receiver and front trunnion that allowed for internal and external component interchangeability, and perhaps most notably of all, the addition of a heavier air-cooled barrel that relinquished the need for the water-cooling jacket. These vast design improvements ultimately culminated in the iconic Browning design that we see worldwide today. Its official designation, Browning Machine Gun Caliber 50 M2HB Heavy Barrel. Depending on the model, the M2 features varying cyclic rates of fire. For instance, the M2HB air-cooled ground gun has a cyclical rate of 450 to 575 RPM, while the aircraft configurations, such as the AN-M2 and the AN-M3, feature a cyclic rate of 750 to 850 RPM and 1,200 RPM respectively. These maximum cyclic rates are mainly hypothetical, as sustained fire at such rate risks wearing out the bore of the barrel within a few thousand rounds, and will require a replacement. But if going all Rambo isn't your style, the M2HB can be selected to fire semi-automatic single shots at less than 40 RPM. Slow and rapid firing modes use 5 to 7 round bursts with different pause durations between bursts. If the bolt release is locked in place by the bolt latch release lock on the buffer tube sleeve, the M2 will function in fully automatic mode. Alternatively, unlocking the bolt release into the up position will enable single shot semi-automatic firing upon pressing the bolt release latch to send the bolt forward. The closed bolt firing cycle made the M2 usable as a synchronized machine gun on aircraft before and during World War II, as on the early versions of the Curtiss P-40 fighter. Throughout World War II, the warplanes of the US Army Air Force were almost universally equipped with the Browning 50 cal. Fighter planes used the M2 in the offensive role, while attack aircraft and bombers used them defensively to ward off intercepting enemy fighters. The P-51 Mustangs had 2 banks of 3 M2 machine guns in each wing, with 6 machine guns providing the legendary fighter aircraft with a powerful punch against both ground and air targets. The P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning were also equipped with the M2, as well as the B-25, B-26, B-17 and B-29 bombers. The M2 boasts an effective range of 1,830 meters, that's 2,000 yards, and a maximum effective range of 2,000 meters or 2,200 yards when fired from the M3 tripod. In its ground-portable, crew-operated configuration as the M2HB, the gun itself weighs 38 kilograms, 84 pounds, and the assembled M3 tripod adds an additional 20 kilograms to the overall weight, that's 44 more pounds. In this configuration, the V-shaped butterfly trigger is located at the very rear of the weapon with a spade handle grip on either side. The bolt release is located in the center, and standard configurations feature a rear-type leaf sight. The spade handles are gripped and the butterfly trigger is depressed with one or both thumbs, discharging the weapon. Recent modifications to the rear buffer assemblies have seen squeeze triggers mounted to the hand grips, forgoing the traditional butterfly triggers. In stark opposition to virtually all other modern machine guns, the M2 doesn't feature a conventional safety mechanism. Instead, some soldiers resort to improvised measures to prevent accidental discharge. One such method is to insert an expended shell casing between the butterfly trigger to prevent depression. As the M2 was designed to operate in multiple configurations, it can be adapted to feed from either the left or right side of the weapon by exchanging the belt-holding pulls and the front and rear cartridge stops, and then simply reversing the bolt switch. The operator must also convert the top cover belt feed slide assembly from left to right hand feed, as well as the spring and plunger located in the feed arm. Despite its rather convoluted sounding nature, this process should take a competent and well-drilled soldier no less than 2 minutes to achieve. The charging assembly can also be switched from left to right. A right-hand charging handle spring, lock wire, and the necessary training is all that's required. The 50 caliber cartridge consists of a cartridge case, primer, propelling charge, and the bullet. The term bullet only refers to the small arm projectile that's propelled out of the barrel. There are 8 types of ammunition issued for use in the 50 caliber machine gun, with the tips of the various rounds color-coded to indicate their type. These include standard ball, tracer, armor-piercing, incendiary, armor-piercing, incendiary, armor-piercing, incendiary, tracer, dummy rounds, and blanks. Ammunition boxes typically feature 100 to 200 rounds. When partnering the M2's semi-automatic capability with the immense firepower of the 50 BMG cartridge, the addition of the M3 tripod, and a mounted high-power scope, the M2 adopts the role of a deadly efficient long-range sniping weapon that can be used to devastating effect. In the case of the now infamous US Marine Corps sniper, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock, this is exactly what occurred in 1967 during the Vietnam War. He managed to neutralize an enemy target from a staggering 2.28 kilometers away, 2,500 yards, or just under 1.5 miles, achieving the longest distance kill in history up to that point. In the 1998 book Inside the Crosshairs: Snipers in Vietnam, retired US Army Lieutenant Colonel Michael Lee Lanning described the shot as such. Firing from a hillside position using an inertial 8x scope on a 50 caliber machine gun stabilized by a sandbag-supported M3 tripod, Hathcock engaged a Viet Cong pushing a weapon-laden bicycle at 2,500 yards. Hathcock's first round disabled the bicycle, the second round struck the enemy soldier in the chest. The uncanny ability of this gun to make heroes of some men and mincemeat of others is one that has been well observed and documented since the onslaught of the Second World War. In one such case, decorated soldier and Medal of Honor recipient Second Lieutenant Audie L. Murphy distinguished himself as a symbol of American fighting ferocity and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds when on January 26, 1945, he was commanding Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, near the French village of Holzwehr when 6 German tanks and several hundred infantrymen attacked his company. Murphy ordered his men to fall back to defensive positions in the nearby woods while he covered their withdrawal and cooled down artillery to slow the German advance. German fire hit an American tank destroyer nearby and set it on fire. Witnesses later recalled, he climbed on the burning tank destroyer, which was in danger of blowing up at any moment, and employed its .50 caliber machine gun against the enemy. From Murphy's exposed position on top of the burning tank destroyer, he killed over 20 German soldiers and repelled their attack for over an hour using the M2 machine gun, despite suffering wounds to his leg. He then led his company in a counterattack that killed or wounded 50 more German soldiers. In what must be the ultimate testament of the longevity of John Moses Browning's engineering ability, a seemingly ordinary M2 .50 caliber machine gun was recalled from active duty to the Anniston Army Depot in Alabama for compulsory maintenance and an upgrade to the M2A1 configuration. At first glance, this particular model didn't seem any more notable than any of the other thousands of units that passed through each year. But upon closer inspection, this particular gun was seen to bear the serial number 324, indicating that this model was one of the original 1933 Colt Run productions, having served for upwards of 89 years. It's difficult to imagine what the face of warfare will look like 100 years from now, whether the battles of tomorrow will be fought with robots or some sort of advanced alien technology. But whatever the future may hold, it's safe to say there's likely a possibility that the M2, in one form or another, will retain its place on the modern battlefield, just as it has for the last 100 years. Thank you again to War Thunder for sponsoring today's episode. Remember, you can try War Thunder's free-to-play game by visiting my unique URL at wtplay.link/sideprojectswt to get a free premium tank, ship, or aircraft, plus 3 days of premium time. And thank you for watching.